All right. Okay. I am Annalee Peters, and the purpose of this video is for an ESL endorsement course through Georgetown College. I'm under the supervision of Beth Ortigan, and this is for the lesson plan project, EDU 580. This course is designed to teach me how to work with ELLs and specifically how to modify a lesson plan. So I'm working with Miss Sherla Ramey from Squires Elementary, and she has been gracious enough to let me look at some plans that she had posted before the NTI, and we just modified those for one specific student whose name is Murdy. And so really, in order to modify a lesson for an ESL student, first off, I'll just ask you, Ms. Ramey, are you familiar with any of the WIDA standards or how you could accommodate a lesson for an ESL student?
Not really the standards that you are specifically referring to. No, I don't know anything about those, but you know, over the years I have had ESL students. I'm always open to more strategies to use with them. I know that, well, looking through your modifications, it's always important to provide them with other opportunities that you don't have to really with the typical students. So I've been looking forward to working with you on this.
Good, good. And I think you're such a great example, just looking at your regular classroom with all of your students. You give all of your students such great opportunities across the board to communicate, to constantly use language. I feel like they're always building on their language. So that's you know, if you walked into your classroom, you would probably think that you had been trained on these different modifications. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of give you a little bit of the WIDA background and kind of what it is, the standards, and then we're going to take a real quick look at the lesson. I'm just going to screen share it, and I'm just going to kind of run through it and then maybe talk about something that you think you could apply to another lesson, or if that lesson is something you could use again. Okay. So in order to plan lessons to better accommodate EL students, the WIDA standards are really what drive instruction. And the standards are based on a student's language proficiency. And that's typically found by using the access test. And I know you know about that.
Right.
We do that at Squires. The standards include sort of like 5 principles. It's kind of like an umbrella that kind of drives the standards. One of those is a can-do philosophy. We build on what the CLD student can do. So they call it a can-do philosophy. They also are built on guiding principles of language development and age-appropriate language, performance definitions, and strands of model performance indicators. And that's a whole lot of things that basically the WIDA can-do descriptors are really what we use when we're looking at making modifications. And when I looked at Murdy's access scores, I basically looked at the levels that he was at in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So there's 4 domains. I looked at those, and what's really cool about the access test is that it gives you kind of like where he should be with his can-do descriptors. So like in reading, it showed, you know, he can identify story elements. In writing, he can write simple sentences, you know, things like that. So we look at what he can do and we build on those things. And really, it's a lot like your classroom. If I walked in your classroom, you're pretty much doing that with a lot of your students, you know. I think that's just best practice as a teacher. But I'm going to real quick just give you the different levels of, like, if we look at the access test scores, you're going to see 5 levels in all the domains. So there's an entering level, beginning, developing, expanding, and bridging. And in looking at Murdy's access scores from kindergarten to first grade, he made huge gains. I mean, absolutely huge gains, which was amazing. So it's really telling me that you and all of the other teachers at Squires are giving him a lot of opportunities to really build on his academic language.
He, at the beginning of the school year in first grade, he wouldn't speak. I mean, you would ask him a question, he would just sit with his eyes open. And so we made a plan that he couldn't just sit there and stare at me, and so we practice things like, you have to say, I don't understand what circus means, or I don't understand your question, or what does circus mean? Things like that, because I had to get him to actually express, is he not understanding what I'm asking? Is he not understanding one term that I'm asking about? So we had to practice with him so that he would be able to articulate what his misunderstanding was. So he got used to that really well and started talking a lot more when he felt free to ask.
And that's really good. I love that you pointed that out, because you were intentional and you said, okay, if you don't understand, this is a question, like this is, you come to me and say, I'm not understanding what you're doing. So that's kind of a strategy that you gave him. And then you also created a classroom where he wasn't afraid. He's not going to be afraid if he's wrong. So that's really important too. It's just that a child making sure that they feel like, okay, if I do get this wrong, nobody's going to be upset about that. So that's,
yes. And he was yes, I think that was one of his real struggles, is I don't want to say anything, because he wasn't comfortable with his language. And so I think he got a lot more comfortable this year.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead, Miss Amy, and screen share my lesson plan modifications. And you let me know, can you see this lesson that I pulled up?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay, so I took this from the McGraw, it's the first grade reading series from McGraw-Hill, The Wonders. And this was a lesson, basically, the I can statement was, I can describe the connection between two people, events, ideas, or information in a text. And when you looked through the modifications, I mean, most of them, I really wanted to give Murdy an opportunity to access vocabulary before the lesson, and kind of, give him opportunities throughout the week through the Connect Ed platform to also do that. So did you have anything, that you wanted to add about those modifications, or what do you think about those?
Well, it's nice that we can use the technology to actually have them get on. And, we did that quite a bit this year. And I would definitely use that more with the ELL kids, because I would have everyone get on and read every now and then. But now that you've pointed this out, I think I should have been much more intentional of having my ELL kids get on, and they could listen to the story the day before we would read. And sometimes when they went to their ELL classes, they would come in and we would get ready to read the story, and they'd say, oh, we heard that in Mrs. Gibson's room. So I know she was doing a little bit of that as well. So they had a chance to sit and be exposed to especially the vocabulary that was in the story, so that they could see that before we actually did it as a whole group.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing I love about Miss Gibson being so intentional. I think she is such a great ESL teacher in that she is so intentional about, giving her students access to academic language and vocabulary before it even happens in the classroom. So she's really strong with that.
I also noticed when you had a lot of chances for the kids to use peer interaction. And I mean, for kids like Murdy, that's so important, that they can not only hear me or hear Mrs. Gibson or hear you talking about the vocabulary, but having a peer talk to them. And not only is that helping them with the vocabulary, but it's also helping them with any language skills, their conversation skills, and that's exactly what Murdy needed. So that accommodation was really good. I noticed you had that in there several times, to do the peer interaction. So I would definitely take that as a strategy to use more often.
Perfect. Okay. Another thing that I added, which is really just kind of making predictions or whatever at the beginning, is using a chart, like a prediction chart, and kind of going through that with them at first, kind of talking through that as a teacher, making your own prediction, showing them how to do that, and then giving them some time to do that on their own, and then check their prediction with a peer. And something that you pointed out to me in the modification earlier, which I really, really appreciated, is, I had said something like, if the student gets the prediction wrong, or if it's incorrect, you said that you like to use the language, your prediction did not match the story. And I love that, because it again creates this really, really safe place for the student. And it's okay for them if they are really wrong, but we're not saying it that way. And I really appreciated
that. Yes, I had heard that earlier in my professional career, but when we were doing lots of predictions, and kids would then get stifled because if you say that their prediction was wrong. But basically a prediction is an educated guess, like you have in your lesson plan. And so as long as it's a guess based on the text and based on the pictures that they see and based on their inferences, then it really isn't a wrong prediction. It's just doesn't match what the author's idea was. So, but sometimes kids like Murdy can actually get a wrong prediction, because really it's completely so off the wall that it doesn't have anything to do with the information that they've seen. And so making predictions and going through that with the chart is a lot better for them to be able to think through with the organization chart, to think through their thinking and say, well, why would this be a prediction? Oh, it's because I see this in the picture. So they can actually explain their thinking if they're doing that on a chart.
Yeah, I really like that. So I also, and one thing I did include in here too, and this is based on Murdy's writing, his access scores, I did include using, helping him with sentence frames. Like, I predict blank because I think blank. And I think that just gives him the opportunity to not feel so overwhelmed that he has to come up with all of this academic language and I have to write all of these words down. If he has this frame, I think it's a little less intimidating.
For sure. And sentence starters are great, not only for any ELL kid, but any first grader as well, because getting that language down and really pinpointing their writing and making it focus on focus on details and getting their idea across helps with those sentence frames.
Yeah, absolutely. And then really this is kind of close to the last part of the modifications that I made for the lesson. But I also just added that when you're checking for comprehension and checking their predictions and giving them time to discuss why their prediction was right or wrong, this is really a good time for like informal assessment. So you can look back and say, okay, maybe this kid didn't get it here. This is a good time to reteach this to Murdy or whatever student in small group, or, at some other time.
Absolutely, because a lot of the kids just, like what you were talking about in small group, you really realize when you have a small group that they don't understand the vocabulary or they don't understand your directions. Because, as you're teaching a child to read, we do a lot based on predictions and looking at the picture and things like that. And, if you're reading a story about a hammock, and that is a very hard vocabulary for an ELL kid as well as any other kid, but a lot of other kids might have had um, that background knowledge of what a hammock is,
Sure.
and may just not know the word. But kids like Murdy, they don't have a clue what hammock is, and so they're, even though you get their mouth ready and you look at the picture, they're not ever going to get the word hammock because they don't know what that word is. So small group is a great time to reteach and really focus on what their needs are.
Yeah, and you do such a great job of that. I love seeing that in your room. So really, the last part of this modification, well, there's two parts. There was a point where they could review the essential question and vocabulary words, and I just added the modification, like, to provide some type of graphic organizer, like a T-chart or some other type of organizer that would allow them to sort their vocabulary words into groups. And a lot of times this just kind of gets them thinking about, like, okay, why would these two words go together? Just kind of making some connections about those words. And this would be a really good way for Murdy to, again, expand on his oral language and his vocabulary just based on his access scores. And this would be something also pretty quick that you could use as an assessment activity, as well.
And because he's explaining his thinking, when you categorize words and say, how are they similar, how are they different, that they're having to express their own ideas, and you learn so much more of what they understand and what they don't understand when they're explaining their thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And then really the last thing now is the extension of the lesson. And this is not something that always takes place, but I just said it as an extension. You could give Murdy more sentence frames based on what he wrote in his prediction. And something like, I think blank is happening in the picture because blank. So like kind of helping him make predictions, because I know making predictions was a difficult skill for him. So an extension phase or expansion phase is just basically an extension activity for him that he could use in a small group or in his time with you or with other students. Like, look at this picture. What do you think is happening in this picture? Let me give you a sentence frame and we can just make our own prediction. So that was just something I added for extra practice.
And there again, when you have that word because, they have to explain their thinking. Yes, that's a good prediction, but why do you think that? And it makes them back up their ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's pretty much all I had for the lesson modifications. But when you're looking at that lesson and you think about Murdy and other ESL students, do you think that these modifications, I think you kind of said a little bit that you might use them, but are these modifications something that you think would be accessible for other students?
I definitely think so, especially the one I mentioned at the beginning is the peer conversation, because not only is that working on the vocabulary, but it's also working on their conversation skills and their listening skills, and all of those skills that you talked about are assessed on the access scores. So all of those modifications would be helpful in developing and moving them up on those can-do statements.
Sure, absolutely. Well, do you have any questions for me now? I really appreciate your time and just letting me kind of pick your brain a little bit, because I know that I can learn quite a bit from you. So do you have any questions for me?
Well, not that I can think of right now. No, it looked good.
Okay, well, great. Well, you know where I'm at. You know where to find me.
That's right. I know how to get you.
That's right. I appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording us right now. Thanks.